Okay, Assalamu alaikum. Part three, this part one, the video's okay. My wife walked past, but you can hardly see her, so it's okay. So we're going on with part three. Okay, and we're still busy with the foreword that was written by Professor Muhammad Harun, who is the son of Imam Harun, who was murdered by the security police during the time of apartheid resistance. Um, One of the things that he did in his life was he did da'wah. He used to help African people in the African townships to become Muslim, and that was one of the things that the authorities did not like about it. And because we were actually not allowed to go into African areas, and he was very, very compassionate towards people who wanted to become Muslim, and generally that was the Imam's approach. Whoever wants to become Muslim, it doesn't matter who he is or where he comes from. The moment a person becomes Muslim, the person is actually on a higher level than the Muslim himself because he's been completely um, forgiven for all his sins. He's like his newborn baby, and he is like a new person. Alhamdulillah. So a Muslim who leads another person into the Islam then asks the person who became Muslim to make dua for him or for her uh, because that person is on a higher level of spirituality at that particular moment. So it's an equalizing fact of life. Continue on it off by saying, taking these thoughts, anyone doing research on and contemporary Muslim education in South Africa would have to consult Ajam's dissertation and his articles. From among his essays, a few uh, a few dealt with biographies and related themes. They have to consult it in order to get a kind of a good understanding of the Cape Muslims, and that's where you have your tourist guides, etc., who just concoct some stories and then come into a cup and talk their own nonsense, which is very upsetting to the people. But that will come to an end. Okay, the second part of Professor uh, Muhammad Harun is Adam's academic articles 1980 to 1999, 1990, 1991. Perhaps it is necessary at this juncture to briefly scan some of Adam's writings to reinforce one's observation that Adam's scholarly interventions during that period, when only few wrote on the themes that he investigated, were critical. One of the themes that he dealt with was biographies of individuals who had left a rich legacy from which current communities continuously draw inspiration. The three iconic figures about whom he wrote were Dr. Abdullah Abdurrahman, who died in 1940, Haji Sulaiman Shah Muhammad, who died in 1929, and Sufi Shahib, who died in 1911. Though the last mentioned was a short entry in a commemorative brochure that was issued during 1980 by the Cape Town-based Habibia Masjid complex, he made sure that the Sufi's life was recorded. So the other two essays, however, were lengthier pieces that were published in South African academic journals during 1990. And in these two essays, Ajam placed the two personalities within their respective context and provided insight into each one's contributions. Very interesting. It gives you a kind of a summary of important Muslims and what their contributions were for for the Muslims in the Cape. And we only make up 1.33% or 2% of the full population of South Africa. While Shah Muhammad was known for having erected the Sheikh Yusuf Makassar mausoleum, which is dated in 1699, is Sheikh Yusuf 1699 of Makassar. He actually erected, Shah Muhammad erected this particular mausoleum for that particular Sheikh at the Fori, located outside Cape Town Centre. Abdurrahman was known for establishing a string of Muslim mission schools that educated many who later entered diverse professional fields. So Dr. Abdurrahman is known for having established a string of Muslim mission schools. Ajam, however, also illustrated how he made effort to secure Scottish Kloof for the Bo-Kaap Cape Malay community in Bo-Kaap, very central to the Scottish Kloof Flats. The details of that particular story will unfold in the thesis, because this was also part of the white dominant colonialists who actually took away property that belonged to the Muslims in Bo-Kaap. And Dr. Abdurrahman was a medical doctor. At that time, you couldn't study to educate yourself here in South Africa, but his father was very rich, so he actually went to Scotland to complete his education and to become a medical doctor there. So he was highly respected, basically, when he came back to Cape Town, not only by the Muslims, but by the non-Muslims as well, and by the authorities of the Cape, being a medical doctor that qualified in Scotland. So let's continue then. In between the publications of these essays, he devoted articles that reflected on Muslim education. These articles, as a matter of information, appeared in international and national journals. This demonstrated that Ajam realized that to make an impact as an educationist, he has to publish his ideas in international journals as well. The one appeared in the then Jeddah-based and now London-based Journal for the Institute of Muslim Minorities Affairs, and the other was the Cambridge-based Muslim Educational Quarterly. That aside, the essays essentially emerged out of his seminal doctoral study. The latter was completed at the University of Cape Town, this is the edited version of that massive 500-page doctoral thesis that he wrote for the University of Cape Town. And the title was the Raison d'être of Muslim mission schools. I'm not good at my French, in Cape Town and environments from 1860 to 1980, with special reference to Dr. Abdurrahman and the modernization of Islamic schools. The dissertation reached almost 500 pages. It was actually 500 pages, and it may indeed still be described as an invaluable study, one that should have been given wider attention and one that should have been edited and published as soon as Ajam received his doctorate degree. Sadly, this was not to be, but despite it not having been reworked for publication soon thereafter, it remains, as stated, a significant dissertation for anyone in the area of Muslim education. Before returning to it and connecting it to the current edited work for which this foreword is being written and which is based on it, permit one to quickly comment on the related articles of Professor Ajam. In 1984, Ajam wrote what is described to be a report on the early Muslim educational efforts in South Africa. In this essay, though, he considered the socio-historical development in South Africa's Muslim communities, and he restricted himself to Cape Town. The second related article zoomed in on non-formal education and the promotion of the Islamic lifestyle in South Africa. Unquote. He used the Bo-Kaap-based Burhanul Islam recreational movement as a case study to rationalize his arguments. And the third text that tied directly with his dissertation, and this was Islamic Schools of Cape Town as Agencies of Socialization, unquote. Herein, Ajam illustrated how Muslims manage schools in spite of their limitations and used Islam as an ideological construct that helped to set them apart from the secular schools that were set up by the Cape colonists. The third part, the third part of his uh, the, the third part of his particular forward of Professor Muhammad Harun is Ajam's doctorate in 1986. From these articles, one could assess Ajam's understanding and insights into the status of Muslim mission schools and to what extent these were able to accommodate the process of modernization that influenced the outcomes of these schools. This was, in fact, the thrust of his dissertation, in which he included most of Cape Muslim's mission schools that were in one way or other set up by Dr. Abdurrahman. That is very important. Perhaps it may be instructive to offer a synopsis that underlines the overall focus and underlying argument. The dissertation, as the title indicates, was concerned with the modernization of Islam-oriented schools in Greater Cape Town and beyond. Ajam, who preferred to call these Muslim mission schools Islam-oriented schools, studied their emergence and development. He noted to what extent they struck a socio-cultural, cum-religious compromise between the community's needs and the South African state's educational policies. Apart from having discussed the state's educational policy and the effects on the expanding Cape Muslim community between 1863 and 1976, he also discoursed about the community's informal educational structures. In addition, he reflected on the educational opportunities that came about through the intervention of the now defunct Muslim Teachers Association that functioned in the 1940s and 1950s, and that was fully supported by Dr. Abdurrahman, who was the driving force behind these Muslim-managed schools. The first chapter, which provided the dissertation's general orientation, was followed by a discussion in the second chapter regarding Muslims' cultural transmission in Cape Town prior to 1860. Before, he talked about schooling opportunities for the Cape Muslims from 1860 to 1900. In the third chapter, the fourth chapter then shifted to conversing about Muslim educational interests and the first Muslim primary school, 1900 to 1910, opened the path for him to discuss the fifth chapter, the founding of Islam-oriented primary schools from 1921 to 1940. Lovely in Professor Harun's forward, he gives a lovely summary of the whole thesis, which I tried to present again in the edited version is the same kind of format or the same kind of sequence. The fourth chapter that shifted to conversing about Muslim educational interests and the first Muslim primary school, 1900-1910, opened the path for him to discuss in the fifth chapter the founding of Islam-oriented primary schools from 1921 to 1940, and in the sixth chapter, the Muslim mission school and the changing political climate, 1940 to 1980. He then reflected in his penultimate chapter on the education policy and the Islam-oriented schools of Cape Town before he offered his findings and prospects for further research in the final chapter. The dissertations on content demonstrate that Ajam covered a long period, and he thus squeezed many pertinent ideas that assisted in showing how the process of modernization affected and influenced Muslims' educational thinking, and in particular, and the Muslim community in general. So again, it points to the fact that one cannot, in actual fact, write on Bo-Kaap or Cape Muslims without having gone to this particular dissertation, because it covers not only education, but the culture of the people and the development of their particular strengths amid all the kind of challenges that they had. When one scans the period when Ajam worked on and completed his dissertation, we can safely say that no one else had worked on the topic that he explored and no one followed up where he had left off. Now, I put that in the book, I put it in bold letters so that one can make the point that Professor Ajam had done really original works. Those of us who research Muslim education look particularly at contemporary educational developments. The earlier period was sidetracked. Okay, so yes, he's making the point that some of the people that write on education only basically deal with current issues, but they don't go back to the original features, which in Ajam's thesis, and now in this edited version. Those of us who research Muslim education look particularly at contemporary educational developments. The earlier period was sidestepped because one needed to do archival research to get a better understanding of those times. And it is this sector that Ajam's dissertation succeeded in adequately covering. He went to archives, he basically interviewed people, he had original letters, meeting procedures, etc., from manuscripts in order to create this particular dissertation. So what people write about, for instance, in the tourist guides, etc., they get from the internet, draw some things from your lit booklets, etc., and they are not original in fact finding in real terms. So it should therefore be underlined that anyone who wishes to investigate early Muslim educational history cannot afford to ignore Ajam's work. The latter not only extracted ideas from secondary sources, but he also hauled information from unpublished memoranda and letters. There's the point I just made now. In addition to these, he also went further by interviewing many key educationists who have since passed on and shared valuable with him regarding these types of educational institutions. In sum, one wants to reiterate that Ajam made a unique study that has stood the test of time, and one laments that Ajam did not take it upon himself to rework it and transform it into a published text. We have a phone call coming, so I'll have to change this particular